Welcome to Building the Future. I'm your host, Kevin Horick. You can check out new episodes of the show every Tuesday and Thursday at 2 p.m. If you missed an episode or want to get more information about the show, please visit buildingthefutureshow.com. Welcome back to the show. Today we have Kristin Smedley. She's a rare eye disease advocate, speaker, author, and TEDx speaker. Kristin, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on the show. I think kind of what you're doing is really cool and innovative and, you know, I think gives a different perspective on kind of, well, blindness and what kind of people are, the perception of it, and just kind of dealing with kind of disabilities in general, because I think more and more nowadays it's starting to become, trendy is the wrong word, but more and more people are talking about it and it's getting covered more. And I think as more and more people move to the internet and kind of software and technology and artificial intelligence and stuff, I think, and technology, we're only getting kind of closer to curing some of this stuff or making it a lot more easier for people that are dealing with some of this stuff. But maybe before we kind of get into everything, let's start off and get to know you a little bit better and cover where you grew up.
Sounds great. So I am a Philly girl.
Okay, sure.
Through and through, I'm a Philadelphia girl. Born and raised, left for a while I was with my former husband going up his corporate ladder and went through, lived in the Midwest and a couple different places, which was great. And now back in the Philadelphia area.
Okay, very, very cool. So you went to the University of Pennsylvania. What did you take there and why did you decide to do that?
Actually, I was at Westchester University of Pennsylvania, which is known for, it used to be called Teachers College way back in the day. So I knew my whole life that I wanted to be an elementary school teacher.
Okay.
So that's where I went, got my degree there, and was on a track to be what I wanted to be, was the teacher of the year.
Okay. So
and life got a little different.
Sure. So before we kind of get into that, what made you want to be a teacher? Was there like a defining moment kind of in your childhood or kind of growing up that you remember, or it was just something in you that wanted to do that?
It was just something in me. Now I'm one of 5 kids. I have 4 brothers.
Okay.
And I don't know if that had to do with it, that I just was always rallying them around, and teaching them stuff and all that. But it's one of those things that I'm finding more and more as I meet people that it's an odd thing that I knew from the time I was very little that that's what I wanted to do.
Interesting. No, I think it's cool. So walk me through, you come out of school or university, what did you kind of end up doing? Like walk me or the listener through kind of your post-university career up until what you're doing now, and then we'll dive deeper into kind of what you're doing now.
Yeah, so I graduated, got I went a little bit different path before I was teaching. It was kind of tricky to get a teaching job when I came out. Went through nonprofit, went to the YMCA, ran youth programs and summer camps and all that, everything that had to do with school-age kids.
Sure. Built
up the resume, and then finally landed a job teaching 3rd grade and loved it. Challenging. I joke now that I said I was in the inner city of Kansas City at that point.
Okay.
Very challenging job. And at the end of that year, I said, and I did very well. The kids were amazing. The school was great. And I said, that was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. And then we'll talk about how my life got a little bit harder than that. But, and then we moved up to the Chicago area. And while I was looking for teaching jobs there, I had this incredible opportunity to work for the Department of Education. And my kids now, they crack up that they say this is how old I am. I worked with teachers and principals on how to teach using the internet in the classroom. When the internet all first came out, and we had these academies that we would have and teach them how to use the internet and all. And planned out, it's funny listening now to myself with where I've been and what I'm doing now and how it impacted it. But I also planned the regional educational conferences that all these teachers go to and principals and administrators. that was cool. And that I had no idea at that point how much that was going to help me now. And then I had my first child.
Sure.
And went, did my maternity leave. I loved where I was working at the Department of Ed. Went back to work. And within a month of being back to work, that's when we got the diagnosis that I did not anticipate with him.
Sure.
So we found, do you want me to dive into that yet?
Yeah, sure. Keep going.
Okay. So my son Michael was the happiest baby you could ever imagine. Super simple. Life was great. It was like, we were in at the time, back then it was the year 2000, they called the big homes the McMansions, and perfect lawn, perfect house, perfect little family. And Michael's eyes started moving kind of crazy when he would lay down on his back.
Okay.
And took him to the pediatrician. It just didn't seem right. Pediatrician immediately sends me to the emergency room for an MRI because they figured it was a brain tumor.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, that was a horrible few hours waiting for that to come back. So the good news was it was Memorial Day weekend, and it was a Friday night. And the good news we got was that he didn't have a brain tumor. It came back clear. The bad news was they anticipated it would be cancer.
Oh,
so
wow.
they admitted him right away, 48 hours of nonstop spinal taps, blood draws, all kinds of stuff. And they were assembling a cancer team. And then it took a week for all the results to come back negative. He didn't have that either. So we then went back to the drawing board and started with new specialists. And it came out of all of that with a neuro-ophthalmologist discovered that he had this rare blindness called Leber's congenital amaurosis, which I had never heard of. It's a very early onset of retinitis pigmentosa. Many more people have heard of RP. So there I was with this perfect little baby. I know this is so weird to me now. I never had met a blind person in my life until it was my son.
Interesting.
Crazy, right?
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
So
then it was an interesting ride since then.
No, but part of the reason I really wanted to have you on the show is because you're such an advocate for obviously blindness and you're doing like amazing things, but you took something that I think to a lot of people didn't handle it as well as like you have been handling it, and you're basically working and trying to help other people across the globe kind of bring this thing forward, and you're writing a book and you're doing all this really great stuff about how you took something that could be very kind of negative in a lot of people's eyes and made it very positive, right? And I love that about you, and I really wanted to have you just to kind of talk about dealing with kind of disabilities and getting people to think about that stuff, because when people are building kind of companies, or sometimes those actual people with different disabilities aren't thought about, right? Or they're such an afterthought. And I just want to have people like you on the show to promote this stuff and actually get people thinking about this. So walk me and the listener through kind of all the stuff you're doing now, because it's a ton of stuff, and then I want to get into the book, but walk us through kind of all the stuff you're doing right now related to kind of everything you're doing, I guess.
Yeah, so you say that I do this in such a positive way, which I do try to do that every day, but I have to at least acknowledge that I did not start there. I'm
Okay.
open now about the fact that I spent a good 3 years, I guess, in the grief process of the life I had planned was not working out that way. And it was my son, Michael, who at 3 years old was the happiest kid in the world, that completely shifted my perception of this whole thing, because he was not impacted. It was me. I had to let go, right?
Sure.
So, I ended up, I've been extremely blessed, and also been blessed with this tenacity of trying to figure this stuff out. So I went and found, I wanted him to be successful, and I wanted him to have a life that he wanted to live. So how do you do that? Well, I had to go find people that were doing the things that I didn't expect people to do with blindness, and how did they get through school, and how did they do all of that? So I started seeking these folks out, and that's really what changed the trajectory of my life. And I wished so badly early on that somebody would have connected me with those folks very early. But it is what it is, and I think it all, your journey is the way it is for a reason.
Sure.
So I spent 9 years. I ended up having a second son that was affected also 3.5 years later. And it took me a few years to be okay with, I say in air quotes, risking a second diagnosis. With LCA, you have a 25% chance with each pregnancy of having another affected kid.
Okay.
So then my Mitchell was diagnosed as well. That kind of took the wind out of my sail for a few weeks, but it was a much easier getting back out there kind of thing, because I had Michael as my built-in role model of this was going to be just fine. I mean, I say just fine, but there was a lot of work that went into getting to understand how a person accesses the world without sight, getting them up
Sure.
close to everything, tons of extra hours in a mom's day. But I also had, I relied on early intervention specialists, the preschool people, all of that, found all the team members that we needed, got all the tools that we needed, and we were coasting along pretty good for 9 years. And then we never knew the gene responsible for the blindness. They were testing it at Johns Hopkins, but it wasn't coming up with anything. And we met a new doctor. I knew that there was some research going on with our disease, and that it would be important to know the gene. But they had told us maybe in 50 years there would be a solution to this, to just figure out how to raise them, which was great advice. I didn't think so at the time. I wanted all kinds of hope and an answer,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
So at any rate, come around 2009, just through the way that things happened, one appointment got canceled. They gave us a different doctor, and that doctor happened to say, hey, listen, why don't we try doing a new blood draw, sending it to a new lab, because they've made a lot of advances in technology and discovery and all. Maybe we can get an answer to this. And lo and behold, it took about 7 or 8 months, but we got the call that they found the gene responsible for the blindness. The gene is CRB1. And no sooner did we get that call on Good Morning America and the Today Show and all those big shows, was a team of doctors that were making progress with gene therapy to reverse not our gene of LCA, but a different gene of LCA. And all eyes, no pun intended, were on this rare eye disease. It was unbelievable. So, and like I said, the boys were doing well. I had started doing some fundraising for a large research organization just to see if maybe there was some hope that we could reverse the vision loss at some point. And I didn't tell my boys at first. It took me a year to tell them that we were getting involved in vision research, because my dilemma was I had been raising them as nothing's wrong with you.
Sure.
Nothing's wrong with you. You do some things differently. You can do anything you want to do. Nothing's wrong with you. And then I'm like, how do I tell them now that I want to work towards fixing something about them, that I never said anything was wrong? And I'm telling you, it took me a year, right?
Wow.
It was quite the mom dilemma. Because
Sure.
I didn't want to go bursting their sail. But so in my true fashion, I guess because I'm a teacher through and through, I need information. I need, people to give me information. I went to their teachers, their principal, educational psychologists. How do I break this news to them? How do I do it? And every single person said the same thing. We don't know, but you're doing good so far, so you'll figure it out. And I'm like, no, I want you to tell me exactly how to do this.
Sure.
So, you know what? By that point, they were, 9 and 6?
Okay.
And I'll never forget the day. I was sitting at our kitchen island. They have these little stools sitting there. And I'm like, you guys, look, here's the thing. There's this opportunity that doctors are working on. And I went through this whole big, long thing. And I'm like, what do you think about getting involved in vision research? And would you want there to be an option for sight someday? And I think that you guys are cool the way you are. And I don't want you to change. I did the whole thing. And they both looked at me. And they were like, well, duh. Of course we would want, if there could be an option someday, sure, we would want to, take a look at an option.
Sure.
And it was super simple. They were like, anything else? Because we got to go. They had stuff to do. It was so funny. And then So then I went full force into fundraising. We tried to get the fundraising directed right towards our specific gene. And at that time, the big organization was saying, no, you can't do that. So God bless the power of Facebook. That was right around, it was 2011 when Facebook really had come on the scene and,
Sure.
and everyone was jumping on it to connect. And I put some messages out there about, I have 2 kids with CRB1 LCA, anybody else? And I found 10 moms that wanted to work together to try to maybe be a next gene in the pipeline for gene therapy.
Wow.
And made a dinky little website on Memorial Day weekend. Memorial Day weekend is a big weekend for me in terms of my journey.
Sure.
So there's Michael diagnosed over the year 2000 Memorial Day weekend. And then come 2011, I'm now launching this little website to what is now the worldwide patient organization for CRB1 retinal disease. At the time, it was just going to be a little group of parents that were going to fund one gene therapy study. Now we literally are global, patients from all over the world. We've got research projects in the pipeline all over the world. I'm on a committee with Retina International.
Wow.
And I don't say all this like boasting, but it's the power of, like I said, I was blessed with tenacity, connections happening at the right times with the right people. So we took this disease, no one ever heard of it, to most conversations where you start mentioning rare eye diseases, CRB1 and Kristin Smedley tend to get mentioned just from, and literally I harnessed the power of social media like a champ. I mean, I was all over that, and some people might call me a serial networker.
That's awesome. No, but that's good. But I think what I love about your whole story, kind of when we talked originally a while ago, is what you did could be applied to kind of anything, right? Like if you have something, whether it's like, like a disease or a disability or a business or a company, or you want just like a group of people dealing with something good, bad, or other, like how you use the internet to basically grow a global community around a cause is inspiring, right? And I think just like kind of getting your advice on kind of all the stuff that you've done, is useful, right? For a lot of people out there. And what I was watching your TED Talk actually again before we recorded, and I love kind of how at the beginning you open with all these kind of successful people with, blindness, right? And like there's a handful of people that have done incredible things that a lot of people would never do even in a lifetime. And so just getting the word and just kind of trying to inspire people around what you've done for a cause, to me, is really inspiring by myself, and really why I want to have you on the show. And I think just if you can inspire one kind of listener to do what they want to do, around a cause, that's kind of, I hope we do that today.
Yeah, and honestly, that's why I so appreciate people like you with your podcast, this platform, to get stories out there, because it was the stories of these people that were succeeding without sight that turned my life around. They were the tipping point for me, and that's why I want to keep sharing their stories and other people's stories, because that made all the difference. And I've actually used this kind of thing with role models, if you will, in every facet now of my journey. So when I needed to figure out how to raise blind kids and what is the possibilities for their life, I went to blind role models, right?
Sure.
When I needed to develop a 501c3 that was going to make some traction really fast, I went to the ones that were doing it really fast. I went to the rare disease organizations, as well as like the Michael J. Fox, who's made a lot of progress really fast and done the stuff that I need to do, and learn from them, talk to them, and even through my divorce. I mean, I went to people that were successfully on the other side and said, how did you handle, what did you do? So the fact that you host things, getting people's stories out is phenomenal to me,
Well,
because I
appreciate
really
that.
think that sharing your story and hearing people's stories, and it makes a connection, for folks in this world, connecting people. But it really, for me, like I said, it was the tipping point in my life that had I not known those folks and figured this out with hearing stories, I don't know where we would be. We would not be as thriving as we are now. I can tell you that.
No, I love that. So before we kind of get into the book, you recently were you're working with the FDA to hopefully get some stuff and some gene therapy kind of approved. Can you talk us through that? Because you kind of told me before the show, but I think that to me is like really, really cool and fascinating. So what are you guys doing right now with the FDA?
Yeah, so we just had the Spark Therapeutics is a pharmaceutical company that did the clinical trials and all of that for a gene therapy where it's a different gene than the one that my boys have, but it's same umbrella, rare eye disease. And in essence, I'm not a scientist at all, but in essence, they develop a synthetic gene and go in and they inject it into the eye with this virus that eliminates the defective gene and in essence takes over so that it does the job it's supposed to do. So that is so scientists everywhere are cringing at how I just described that, right? Because it's a very technical thing and whatever. So that's your little third grade teacher one.
I think the average person will understand that better than the scientific.
Yeah.
So I appreciate it.
Right. So that being, the non-scientific thing. So now it's the FDA has to approve it, right?
Okay.
So there's like tens of thousands of pages in the application to defend the science, and then it's they did the clinical trials to see, not to get all hung up on gene therapy, but back in the late 90s, gene therapy came on the scene. They tried it to cure one thing. It cured it, but then it made people's entire systems go haywire, and there were people that died from it.
Oh.
So gene therapy came to a screeching halt. And then years ago, it was revived, if you will, because what they figured out was, here's something I never knew. The eye is its own system so if you do gene therapy in the eye and it goes haywire in the eye, it won't go systemic. Is what the theory was, because of being its own system. That's why ophthalmology is the field that advanced so quickly with gene therapy. So, it's kind of like the perfect storm. So at any rate, now the FDA has to say, you have to prove if this is safe or not, and then the FDA has to approve it as a treatment or not. So we were just at a special committee hearing at the FDA. This advisory committee takes in all of the testimony for an entire day where Spark Therapeutics defended all the science, explained it. The panel of 16 people asked a zillion questions.
Wow.
And then there was an hour of 14 speakers from the public that spoke on behalf of this gene therapy. I had the most amazing opportunity to be one of those speakers. And there were patients that have had the gene therapy that were able to testify to say what they couldn't do before and what they could do now. And so when you listen to the science in the morning, it doesn't sound as impactful when they're talking about, the patient could do the obstacle course with one light level change. And you think, well, that doesn't sound that big. But then when this little guy, Corey, stands up and says that he's like 8, I think, and he says he had the gene therapy, and before gene therapy, he had to come in from playing outside when it was dark and his friends were still out there. After the gene therapy, he's out there playing at night because he can see in the dark. Like that kind of thing is huge,
totally. That's amazing, really.
And I had met some of them. Yeah, it's unbelievable that and they're so excited. I mean, I've met a couple of the kids that have had the gene therapy, and all along, folks have been saying for 6 years, did it really work? It doesn't seem like it really worked. I'm looking at the science, and I'm like, I'm not a scientist. I'm a mom, and I'm watching these kids. I met one before gene therapy, and then I met him 2 weeks after the gene therapy, and the stuff he could do, I'm like, sorry, you can say all you want if the science doesn't seem right. It works. I've seen it work. So at any rate, that was the advisory committee. Then they vote at the end of the day, after all the testimony, on whether they'll recommend it, that the FDA should approve it or not. And I don't know if it was the shortest vote in history, but it was pretty darn short, and it was unanimous. Yes, it was such a win for the field. Yeah, it was. We're still riding high on that. And it's an interesting thing that I've said to people. You know, it's an interesting dance that I do, because I live in the people can be successful without sight. It's no big deal if you have all the resources you need, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I also live in the but if the science advances enough and we can restore vision, then that is something that I'm a proponent of. So my deal is I'm the option person. As a mom, I have 2 very different kids. All I want is to put options on the table, you know, live your life without sight and be successful, or have an opportunity for sight and be successful. You pick. So that's my job, just to get options to them. And I've said all along, knowing how different Michael and Mitchell are, I would bet you that one will pick one option and one will pick the other.
Sure. No, that's actually quite fascinating. So walk us through you have a new book coming out. Walk us through, obviously, kind of why you decided to write a book, and kind of what the book's about, and kind of how you're changing the perception of blindness.
Yeah, so this was supposed to just be a little manual, a little handbook, you know, maybe some stories stapled together. The whole objective of this was, I just don't want any mom sitting in a little retina exam room getting the news that her baby is blind. I don't want another mom to sit there and feel the way I did when they said to me, I don't know what to tell you. Good luck. You know, when, like I said, if somebody would have handed me a few stories, a few names that day, I wouldn't have wasted 3 years crying on my couch. Would my life have turned out the same? Maybe, but it just would have been a heck of a lot more helpful had I known stuff earlier. So this was supposed to just be a little thing that a doctor says, here's probably the worst diagnosis you've heard ever, but here's some stories of possibility and potential, and if you go get the right resources and connect with these people, your child will be just fine. It's now become I now, by way of all of my work and my voice and being out there, my platform is a lot bigger, so it'll be able to reach and impact more people. But the funny thing is, as I'm going through doing these interviews of these 13 amazing people, it actually covers 14 people. I interviewed 13, and in my intro, the first mega deal blind person we ever met, I build my intro around him because it really changed the trajectory for my boys. But listening to their stories, I'm telling you, I've reread them. Going through my divorce, I went back into some of those stories and learned something about surviving divorce through their stories. And my editor is actually she was my 6th grade English teacher.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that fun? And every single story, when I would send it to her to edit, she would email me back at how life-changing it was to read that story. And it has nothing to do with blindness. Isn't that funny?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Just their stories are, it's about resilience and
totally.
And looking on the bright side. I actually have their story, and then I have a section in every person's chapter of what's the bright side that they found in blindness. Because my son Michael always calls it blind perks when he gets to be at the front of the line at the amusement park and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, their stories are just there's information in all of their stories for anybody struggling with having a pivot in life and that you didn't expect, or a roadblock hits and working around it. So it's been the most amazing journey getting to know these people and their journeys.
Sure. So when do you think the book's going to come out? Do you have kind of a timeline?
Yeah, we're looking at early 2018. So probably, we're hoping for January.
Okay.
But early 2018.
Okay. So obviously, I want people to read the book, but give us a couple examples of kind of people that or quick I guess, quick overviews of a couple people that you have stories about in the book and kind of what they did? Because I think it's really impressive what these people accomplished.
Yeah, and some of it is like, it's not even that earth-shattering. It's just interesting. Like, keep it simple. So there's Kathy Nimmer, who is Teacher of the Year in Indiana. I think it was 2015, and then she was in the top 4 teacher in the country, right?
Really?
And she's totally blind.
That's amazing.
Yeah, totally blind. And I'm talking to her, and I said to her, with the whole, how did you do that? Like, what did your parents do differently? And they raised you to be, you always knew you wanted to be a teacher, and you just went for it. And I'm like, and there's that statistic of 70% of blind people are unemployed. And how did you go about that with all that? And she said, nobody ever told me. Her parents never told her that it was challenging to be blind. Her parents never told her that all these unemployed blind people, they just never told her. They just said, okay, what is it that you want to do? And we'll find you the resources, and then you go do it. Isn't that hilarious? It's like,
that's amazing.
As parents, I think sometimes we just give them way too much information or something. I don't know. But I thought that was hilarious. And now she, at the time that we were talking, she had just wrapped up as Teacher of the Year in your state. You then go and pretty much meet the entire state. You go to districts and you do workshops and you work with them on being better teachers. Well, now she's always wanted to be a teacher. After she did that for a year, then she's like, I really like this. I like being in the classroom, but I like impacting all these teachers. And then here she is in this dilemma of, where do I go from here? Now, like another whole facet of the world opened up to her. That was so cool to listen to her, and that she travels all around and figures it all out as a blind person. Was totally cool. And then there's Chris Downey was an architect, a very successful architect, and had, I can't remember his condition that he had, but he had some other condition that he had a surgery to fix. But they, if I remember right, they nicked his, I think it was the optic nerve. Whatever they hit, he woke up completely blind at, 40-some years old. Wakes up completely blind. And this is an interesting thing that gives you a lot of insight into our services for the blind in this country. He wakes up, he's blind. Within a couple of hours, the social workers or whatever come into the hospital room, and they're like, okay, what was your job? He's like, I'm an architect. And they're like, okay, well, obviously we're going to have to find something else for you to do. And they're talking unemployment, and they're talking, all this stuff. And they hand him some crazy, he was calling it a Fisher Price or Play School phone. They take his iPhone and give him this other thing. And he's like, hold on a minute. I've been blind for a couple of hours, and nobody has any expectation for my life now. And
Sure.
They're like, well, you can't possibly still do the stuff you do. So he says that he had a little bit of feeling sorry for himself, and then realized, his father had passed. He had a 10-year-old son at the time.
Okay.
And his father had passed away when he was 10. And he thought in that moment, like, he had to be there for his son. He had to show him that you still keep going. So it was his son that was the inspiration for him. Within a month of waking up blind in the hospital, within 1 month, he was back to work as an architect.
Wow.
Figuring it out.
That's
and
great.
Now he's busier than ever. He actually has a phenomenal TED Talk on his point of view is that if cities and communities would design their way of doing things with the blind in mind, it would build communities so much better. And I'll let you watch that TED Talk to see his whole message. But
sure.
Yeah, somebody like that goes back to the exact same job that you would, could you ever think of a blind architect? It just sounds ridiculous, right? And then here he is, completely successful. So, yeah, super. And then his journey with it and how he went through the acceptance is fantastic. That's what I'm saying, lessons for all of us and everyday stuff.
No, totally. I think that's incredible, right? Like, especially something so visual like that, right? Like, yeah, or career, right? So now that's fascinating. So I know we've kind of covered this roughly throughout kind of our chat, but how do you, because you're a big advocate for kind of changing the perception of blindness and kind of, I think even just getting people to think about the differences in human beings, right? I think it's bigger than kind of blindness. But how are you trying to change the perception of kind of blindness and the difference between human beings?
Well, the whole reason that I got onto this, I don't know, not a bandwagon, but a bullhorn, if you will, was because all of a sudden, a couple of years ago, I was slammed with the statistic of 70% of blind people are unemployed. And that blew my mind. And then as I dove deeper into it, because I'm watching my boys, I mean, they're in all the top honors and advanced placement in a regular public school, which is actually a school district that's top in our state and top in the country. So it's a competitive school.
Sure.
They're,
That's amazing.
Blazing through it. They were on, they've each won championships on regular sighted baseball teams, the only blind kids to play in the area. I mean, they've done all this stuff. And then I hear this statistic and I'm thinking, are you kidding me? They have all the resources. They're succeeding. What's the problem here? Well, there was a couple of things, what are the job opportunities for blind people? Well, it turns out that's not an issue because I'm meeting all these different folks that can do all different things. It's employers. So when I was talking with Kirk Adams is in the book. He's the CEO of the American Foundation of the Blind. And he was saying, it's a tricky thing when you're blind, when you're trying to get a job. You send the resume out, right? He says, do you disclose on that whether you're blind or not? Because the challenge is you say you're blind, they don't even call you for an interview. Because they think that you can't, employers think that, it's going to take so many different changes around here to be able to make this accessible, and they think it's a bigger deal than it really is. So he says, you don't even get an interview, or if you don't disclose that you're blind, you show up at the interview with your cane, and they're like, are you kidding me? So that's when I started finding out that the perception out there is that blind people can't do much. So people close their minds to like an opportunity to hire a blind person in a position that you might not think. So that was the reason I started getting on this bullhorn of, hold on a second. I just started doing some blogging and getting, a Facebook page, just get my voice story out there that, hey, they can do a lot. What is this? And then it just it just grew and grew and grew from there. Like I said, God bless the power of social media. And I also, while I was running my research organization, I made a switch 3 years ago from being in the nonprofit, investigating things and learning about things in the nonprofit world. I switched over to the entrepreneur world. Listened to podcasts about entrepreneurship and all of that to grow that mission bigger, which helped my platform, and my bullhorn got louder.
That's
and
amazing. Really,
everyone we meet now, so I'll put it in context here. Kids that have grown up with my kids, we joke that they're gonna like Michael and his friends are going off to college next year. And I joke that these kids are gonna go to college, bump into a blind person and say, so what baseball team were you on? What football team? Do you want to go, here? Do you want to,
That's
they
amazing.
Just don't see any limits. They don't see limits on blind people because my guys have been out there with them doing everything. And really that's the whole thing that I noticed. And then, like I say in the TED Talk, my daughter was born into this. My third child was born into a family that has 2 blind kids, but inclusion was in place. Accessibility was in place. So she doesn't see limits either. So when your perception shifts to, so they've got a vision impairment. All right, what resources do they need? If you shift it from they can't do anything to they just do some things differently, it literally opens up the world for everybody. And it only took me how many years to figure that out. So that's the reason.
No, I think that's amazing, and for people that, I kind of want to step back a second. When you say kind of the employer kind of thing kind of resonated with me in the sense that they have all these perceptions of it. But when you're talking to them about this stuff, what things do they need to do or not do, or kind of what things do they think they need that it's just not a thing? Like, I guess, what are the myths and kind of actual truths about what they need to change or not change, or how do they kind of hire, blind people or whatnot into their organization? Like, nothing's changed.
You know what? It's funny. I think people are so nervous to ask any questions, right? And if people would just ask, hey, what would you need
Sure.
to be successful in this job? You know, simple. And my guys can rattle off in 5 seconds. I will say that even just in the past 2.5, 3 years since I had the idea to put this book together and started talking to people, the technology that's come about that fast is unbelievable. You know, so my guys can do pretty much everything with their iPhones. We don't even have they don't even touch paper Braille anymore. Everything can be emailed to they have these little Braille notes that it's almost the size of an iPad, and the Braille comes up on these metal pins that refreshes. So they do all their work. Like right now, they do all their schoolwork on these things, and they can email their assignments directly to their teachers. They can print out regular print things. I mean, there's so much technology out there that you know, say it's an office job or you know, working with computers and stuff like that. It's so accessible because the Apple products have the voiceover already built in. So, oh my God, so many things around my house talk. The iPhone, they have it on, that talks. You know, the iPad talks. The Mac computer talks. Everything talks. They end up putting their earphones in because it's like, oh my God. But there's so much out there in terms of technology that levels the whole playing field and takes blindness out of the picture. But really, people just have to ask. I don't know why we as people are so nervous about, what are we going to hurt somebody's feeling by saying, hey, how do you do that? Or, you know, with a blind person, how do I walk with you that's respectful and kind and get you to, you know, if you need assistance walking?
Sure.
Simple things, you know?
I guess if it comes across as like you're generally trying to like help them, I think the average person's not going to get offended by that, right? It's kind of, right? Like to your point, like if you say like, okay, I really think you're qualified for this job, and like, what do I need to buy you to supplement, you know, the regular computer we're going to get you already? I don't see that as a negative. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that people probably think that, you know, to adapt a computer is $1 billion or something, you know?
Yeah, sure.
And it's, you know, it's a screen reading program. It's like, it's probably down to a couple $100 if even that. And now there's an app for everything.
Sure. Yeah.
There's an app for all of it, you know? And like I said, with the Apple stuff, it's already built in. So it's not even, it's just not that big a deal to make things accessible.
Yeah, and to be fair, like I work in kind of tech as my day job, and so I do have to say, like, the accessibility stuff built into iOS is really incredible for a handful of different kind of things, you know, blindness and other things as well. And Google is catching up, I would say, but they're nowhere near as good as kind of the iPhone and what Apple's kind of done in the accessibility space. And to your point, just as kind of a third onlooker into the kind of the industry, you're right. The screen readers are getting really good because we test some of the software we're working on kind of through that stuff, and they're basically, you know, so inexpensive or free, and they do a really good job, kind of Mac, and even there's some not too bad ones on Windows. So just for kind of employers out there, if they were like, oh, what is this going to cost me? Like, I personally have tried this stuff and it works pretty good, right? If not, like almost in some cases, I've used it just to like, you're doing something else and you just kind of want to, you know, sometimes it's more convenient, to be fair, just like, just read it to me. So I totally get that. Right. The other thing that I'm curious to know about is you mentioned they play, your son or both your sons play baseball. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Well, like how does that, and I don't even know how to say it like properly, but how do they kind of do that? Because like, how does that kind of work?
No, it's a great question. That's like, what everybody says. How do you do that?
Yeah, like I don't want to like offend you, but I'm so curious.
No, it's like you think about it, shut your eyes, you're going to have a baseball coming at you.
Well, that's kind of the first thought I thought of was like, I played baseball as a kid and just sometimes you get hit with the ball, being able to see fine. So
I know, and believe me, when Michael was 9 and said, now he had grown up playing in a blind sports league, like he learned all the different sports with blind people and adapted sports and all that, and then all of a sudden, you know, when he's in the regular public school, and this kid is out there at recess and lunch, and hearing these kids go back and forth about their baseball teams and who sucks and what sucks and all that kind of stuff. And he wanted to be a part of it. And when he came to me and said, I want to join Northampton baseball, I'm like, I did the same thing. I'm like, you remember that you can't see, right?
Sure.
You know that ball's hard when it's coming at you. And God love him, I said, oh, well, he's like, well, you always figure things out for me, Mom, so can we figure this one out? I'm like, darn. Okay, let's do
that's
it.
Amazing.
Let's walk on over to baseball registration. And the commissioner looked at me and looked at his cane, and he goes, oh, we have the Miracle League. It's a special needs baseball league. And I'm like, I know. Michael wants to volunteer for that league, but he wants to play in the regular league. And he took a minute, fought real hard, and he's like, well, let's figure it out. And
That's
found
amazing.
this incredible coach. I know, right? He found, and now at that point, Michael he was on the football team. A lot of people knew him from school, so he was amazing on the swim team. So people figured, hey, and they knew that I would be 100% in with being there to help and figure it out. I wasn't just going to drop them off at the field and they had to figure it out. So anyway, all of that lined up for, they found us this incredible coach that we were, lucked out, got on his team. And the way they did it was they play in the outfield. I wasn't even hearing of infield, that was just seemed a little nuts to me that ball moves pretty fast.
Sure.
So they would play in the outfield with another guy, and there was an understanding in the league with every coach that we could have an extra person out there on the field because, God forbid some of these coaches try to look at any possible way to get the win. So we had, like say Michael was in right field, he had another guy. If the ball came out to right field, the other guy would field it, give it to Michael, and then everyone learned real quick that if Michael had the ball in his hand, everyone had to shut up because the one voice would call his name so say the play was at second, the second baseman would call his name and Michael could throw it right to him.
That's cool.
And make the play. Yeah, it was, and then Mitchell followed suit. He did the same thing. And then in batting, they hit off the tee. Now I will say that was a struggle with Michael when he started because at that point at 9, he played, 9 through 12. But at 9 years old, there were no tees anymore. This was the big leagues.
Right.
And he was, a typical 9-year-old boy. He didn't want to hear about a tee. So then we had to have a conversation about, well, you can stand up there and swing. And we don't do things that they said, well, then he could get, 10 swings, 10 strikes before he's out. And I'm like, that's not how we do things. We don't change the world because you're blind and change all the rules. You only get 3 strikes and you're out. So you're going to stand there and probably get out every single time. So what does that do for your team? Nothing. Whereas if you have the ball on the tee, you have a much better shot at hitting the ball and helping your team. And that's what sold him. He was like, fine, it'll help the team. And, he led the team in RBIs that season, his first season.
Really? That's amazing.
Yep.
That's really cool.
And he also had to get out. He's gifted, right? So he's sitting there one night giving me this whole speech about velocity and blah, blah, blah. He was mad. He would never be able, not mad, he was frustrated. He'd never be able to hit the ball over the fence because there's no speed to it. It had to be all in the power of him swinging. And I'm like, you know what? But think about it. You're on a baseball team. You're having the time of your life. You're playing out on the field. You are involved every other way. So there's one thing that you're not going to be able to do. What do you do?
Sure. Yeah.
And then you got over it. But yeah, and then they went on the next year, lost every game, ended up in the playoffs because that was the rule. Everybody got a shot at the playoffs. Thank God they had that rule.
Sure.
And then from that point on, they won. They went all the way to the championship and won in extra innings.
That's amazing. That's really cool, actually.
Yeah. And then 3 years later, Mitchell was on the same team, the Orange Mets, and his team won the championship too.
That's amazing. That's really cool. But Kristin, sadly, we're out of time. So let's close the show with mentioning where people can get more information about yourself, check up on the book, watch your TED Talk, and your organization.
Yeah, so every single thing I do for the most part is on my personal site, KristinSmedley.com, and I'm Kristin with an I-N. and my last name's Smedley.com, and that's where you can find everything. But my organization is at crb1.org, and that's where you can get all the the number one. I named the website after our gene because I was out of brain cells. I just had to get it done. So crb1.org. And I also have, the book is Thriving Blind. You can get information at KristinSmedley.com, and then we have a community on Facebook where I post videos and updates on the stuff that my guys are doing, and then we'll be launching all the book stuff there too. So it's just Facebook, Thriving Blind.
No, that's amazing. And I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be on the show, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you, and have a good rest of your day.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for having me, and thanks for the work you do. It's great.
Thank you. We'll talk soon. Okay, bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. The music for the show was done by Electric Mantra. You can check them out at electricmantra.com and keep building the future.